Hey, we're back. Welcome. We are talking to Hope Pedraza today. She is now a friend of mine. I had her on the podcast a couple years ago. She's a certified holistic nutritionist, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and certified hair, tissue, and mineral analyst. She's also into a whole bunch of other stuff. She's a Pilates girl. She has her own brick and mortar Pilates studio. She's the host of her own podcast called Hope and Wholesome. She's amazing, so knowledgeable, and I wanted her to come and talk to us all about holistic nutrition during perimenopause. So season 5, we're really supporting women who are in all stages of their lives and talking a little bit more about peri and menopause. So let's get into it. So excited to have Hope back. I will link our first conversation in the show notes. Welcome to season 5 of the Wellness as a Way of Life podcast, the less is more source of wellness, knowledge, wisdom, and inspiration for female leaders and founders. Here, we teach you why not all wellness trends are for you, how to figure out which ones are, and how to best adapt them for your own personal wellness toolbox. Ultimately, we need to know how to integrate your wellness practices so fully that they become to feel like brushing your teeth, a foundational part of who you are and not a check mark on your to-do list. I'm your host, Megan Swan, creator of the Wellness as a Way of Life community and the Sustainable Integrated Wellness Approach. I have more than a decade of experience in the wellness industry and on my own personal journey, learning how to tune into and trust my intuition and drown out all the noise. As a certified health coach, detoxification expert, plant-based chef, yoga teacher, and consultant, I will help you distill down the information overload and feel more confident and at ease in your own skin. This season, some of the topics we are focusing on are self-care being essential to self-leadership and leadership, holistic preventative health fundamentals for women as we age, sober curiosity, especially when it comes to optimizing yourself for entrepreneurship, ancient wisdom of cacao and consuming superfoods that are sustainably produced, and finding more pleasure in the patterns and beauty of it all. Here, we know that in order for health and wellness to be sustainable, we need a less is more approach, leaving the information overload and tips overwhelm behind. So take what you love and leave the rest. Let's swan dive in. Welcome back to Wellness as a Way of Life. Today, we're chatting with my friend Hope Pedraza. She was on a previous episode, which I will link, and you can get to know a little bit more about her and her story. But today we're going to really drill down on nutrition and holistic wellness tools for women that have perimenopause and menopause on the horizon. So first, Hope, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Megan. I'm so glad to be back.
Are you still based in Texas?
We are. I am. Yes. Good memory. I'm in San Antonio. Yeah.
Love San Antonio.
Yeah.
So tell us, what are you seeing in the world of, let's start with sort of perimenopause, meaning women as early as 35 could be considering, how can they best support themselves to have their hormones in balance at that point?
Yeah. Such a good question. I mean, really, it's a loaded question because we could go so many directions on this, right? But I think there's multiple things to look at here because, yes, we want to kind of keep as much balance as we can as your hormones are starting to shift and you're moving towards that menopause state. And then, but at the same time, we want to keep function of certain parts of the body intact so that when we do reach the menopause stage, that we're preventing things that could go wrong, like other things could go wrong. So I say that. So when we're kind of getting into the perimenopause, I think the first thing, and really, even if you're not in perimenopause at 35, I think it goes for anyone like 35 and older. I mean, honestly, let's be real, it's probably 30 and older. I mean, every decade of your life, you start to lose muscle mass. And, women, the biggest complaint, I think one of the biggest complaints from women when they get to perimenopause and menopause is the weight gain situation, right? It's a real thing. And there are multiple factors at play. We could talk about all that's in play. But a big part of it, I think a really big part of it is we're chronically losing muscle mass as we age. I mean, that's a big piece of it. And if we're not consistently, consciously working on holding on to it, then you're losing it. And the more we lose it, the slower your metabolism, right? So of course you're going to hold on to body fat and your weight's going to start creeping up because we're not doing what we need to do to hold on to it. So I think first and foremost for anyone over the age of 35, but as we're going into perimenopause, I think that should be the first priority is just holding on to muscle mass. And so, what does that look like? Well, I think the two biggest factors for holding on to muscle mass is going to be protein intake and it's going to be building muscle. So it's strength training. I'm not saying you have to go, pretend to be the Hulk at the gym, but if you're not doing strength training, if you're not doing some sort of strength training, whatever that looks like for you, then the fact is you're not holding on to muscle. And with the strength training has to come adequate protein. And I think in my experience, that's the biggest piece for me, because they could be lifting weights at the gym all week, but if they're eating 1,300 calories a day, they're not getting enough protein. So they're using their muscle as fuel rather than building muscle when they're doing, their strength training, whatever. So women really, most women should be getting, I mean, it's going to vary from person to person, but I say most like average size women should be getting at least 100, 120 grams of protein a day. And that's really on the low end. And I think as we age, we really need to stick to that 120 grams as the minimum, just again, because we are starting to lose muscle mass. And so that's going to help. So I have seen that be one of the biggest game changers for women going into that perimenopause state is just holding on to muscle mass. And it's just that combination, the protein and the strength training.
Yeah. Love that you say all that. So let's define our terms even more. I'm guessing you work with some women who are not so concerned about it being plant-based and others that are wanting plant-based options for protein. Like, what does that look like if we take, let's go 3 meals a day, what percentage of the plate needs to be either, protein from animal sources or plant-based? And do you have an opinion on the value of either?
I personally don't. And I think there's a lot of conflicting information out there, but honestly, if you look at the data and you look at the studies out there without cherry picking what you do and don't want to believe, protein is protein. Mm-hmm. And, there's, I don't know if you follow the guy, Simon Hill, he has the Proof podcast and he is really good at debunking. So if y'all haven't ever checked out that podcast, go check it out because he's really good at debunking and he will speak to both sides of it. He's predominantly plant-based, but he's not afraid to be like, okay, I was wrong about this. So and I say that because I've learned a lot just from the studies that he's dissected on this, where it's like a lot of times we are cherry picking thing because we want this to be true. We want this to be true. But the fact is all amino acids are prevalent in every single plant-based source. So you can't say you're getting quote unquote incomplete. And that's the big thing out there is you're getting incomplete protein because it's not, but when you're eating a combination of different plants, you are getting the complete protein. You're getting all the essential amino acids. So there's nothing lacking. Now, do you need to eat more of it? Probably your portions need to be bigger. I think that's the thing that people kind of miss, that you're going to have to eat more of it because it's not as protein dense, right, as animal protein. But I honestly don't really have a preference for my clients. I mean, some of them do want to be predominantly plant-based or they feel better when they're not eating as much animal protein. And some of them they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. So I think, if you're breaking it down throughout the day, you're wanting to look at getting like 25 to 35 grams of protein every time you eat. And if you stick to that range, you're really getting what you need to get throughout the day. If you're eating, consistently throughout the day, maybe you do 3 big meals and a couple snacks. Or if you're doing, 3 big meals, then you want to stick to the higher end of the range, right? And maybe you're going up to 40, 45 if you're doing just 3 meals a day. But if you're eating every 4 hours, because I think this other thing, I didn't say this before. I think the other thing really, of course, there's conflicting information about this too, but the blood sugar thing is a big thing too. And I think having stable blood sugar is a big piece. I mean, it's a big piece of chronic disease anyway, like in dysregulated blood sugar. But I think dysregulated blood sugar is just another stressor on the body. And here's the thing with perimenopause going into menopause. So when you go into menopause, right, your ovaries, they're not producing estrogen anymore. So now we have to rely on our adrenals, okay, for the little bit that you're going to have left, like that's, being created. And I find that a lot of the problem is if we're going into menopause and our adrenals are totally shot, then where is your estrogen coming from? Like it's nowhere. So I find that a lot of times so many people struggle with this transition is because they haven't taken care of their adrenals. That's a big piece of it. And I say that because the chronically dysregulated blood sugar is a stress on your adrenals. Your cortisol and your blood sugar go together. So if your blood sugar is all over the place, then your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, that's all over the place. And so this is a stressor on the body. This is, a big cause of chronic inflammation in the body when your blood sugar and your cortisol are all over the place.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple points there in terms of just being conscious that, ongoing living in a state where you're just surviving in stress mode is not sustainable in many ways, but specifically this conversation, you're setting yourself up to have even worse experience in peri and then menopause.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
Okay. So, and I love the weight. I think my personal experience, I think there's a lot of sort of, there's some stereotypes around like building muscle, need to be going to a gym, what it looks like. And you could do so much with your own body weight, something like Pilates. I mean, I love HIIT, but just like not being, I think there's still groups of women that don't like to think that or look muscular, if you will. And sort of, they're fearful of putting on muscle. And I love how you frame it that it's more about not losing it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. That's exactly. I mean, like I've said, you don't have to. Well, here's the other thing. I think women really don't, a lot of women, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of women really don't understand is the women that they quote unquote don't want to look like, that are big and bulky and muscular, are eating a ton of calories. Like it takes a lot of work for a woman to get big and bulky just because our hormones don't lend that direction. It's easier for men because they have testosterone. It's a whole different ballgame with the hormones. With women, we are estrogen driven beings. It takes a lot of work to build that much muscle. And so women who, are afraid to go to the gym and lift weights, like you have to be eating a whole bunch, like well over 2,000 calories to be bulking that much. And you have to be lifting really heavy weight, like every single day of the week. So it's just the combination of the two. It's not as easy as people think, like, I'm going to go to the gym and, 8 weeks from now, I'm going to look like, female version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like it doesn't happen like that. So I think that's the first thing, is that setting expectations where it doesn't happen like that. But yeah, it's also like, you don't have to build a whole lot of muscle. Like you said, it's really just about holding on to what you have and not losing it. Because if you're, doing too much cardio, if you're not eating enough calories, then you're using your muscle as fuel for your workouts. You want to just hold on to it. It's just about holding on to it, maintaining.
Yeah. Well, I've been a yogi for 15 plus years. And I think, done right, that's an example of a practice similar to Pilates. You are using, like, you need a balance of strength and flexibility.
Totally.
For us moms, like I know when now my kids, maybe one of them I could carry if I had to, but just like, don't you want to be in a position where you can, travel and lift the suitcases and all the things and not have back problems later?
Right. Totally. Right. And I think that's a huge point, because I also think that's something that, when you're 35 or 40 years old, you may not be thinking about, your quality of life when you're 70. And do you want to live an active life? Like, do you want to be able to, like you said, travel, lift things, like not throw your back out when you're getting the groceries out of the car? It's like, because that's always how it happens. Like, you're doing something dumb when you throw something out. It's like, well, if you do more functional movement, right? If you're working out, building strength and maintaining strength as you age, then things like that are less likely to happen. And yeah, you can be active for, your grandkids, your kids, or whatever. And it's just having that perspective, I think, is a big piece of it. And recognize it, because honestly, I will say you don't even have to be 70 for those things. Like people, I have a brick and mortar Pilates studio, and I see that all the time. Women, I was just having a conversation before this call with my manager. There's a new lady who came in, and she has some issues with some discs in her back, and she's not old. She's like maybe close to 50. She's still young. But she's like, even sitting is painful for her. And so she's like, the doctors are like, you're weak. You just need to build your core, all these things. So it's like, we need to keep that in mind, where it's like, it's about building strength and functional movement as we age, so we can live and not be, incapacitated, and we can still move around and live life,
I love that you bring that term functional movement into it, because it wasn't top of mind for me at this moment, but that's what it is, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
can you sit on a floor and get up easily?
Exactly.
Or like,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some people, like, it takes them 3 tries to get off the floor, or, they couldn't even, functional movement, look it up if
Yes.
you don't know what we're talking about. And I think,
Yes.
I'd love if you can kind of paint a little bit more of a picture of the adrenals and how women we can sort of be preventative or protect them and be aware of how our behaviors are really setting us up to be estrogen challenged in the future.
I like that term, estrogen challenge. That's good. So, I mean, really and truly, our adrenals, we should be, I don't want to say worried about them, but should be intentional about taking care of them now, because our adrenals are also like now, before you hit, well, I say now, for those who are not quite perimenopause or menopause, your adrenals are still responsible for making your progesterone. So they're still making hormones for you. And it's still important for your balance of estrogen and progesterone. And so as we age, the role just kind of, switches a little bit. So when we talk about our adrenals, we hear talk about cortisol a lot, and it's the stress hormone, and, cortisol makes you gain weight and all this stuff. The fact is, though, that yes, first of all, your cortisol and your blood sugar are very closely related. So those two things are going to kind of move together. When you are chronically stressed and you're chronically putting stress on your adrenals are going to continue to pump out more and more cortisol, right? So that's continue dysregulated blood sugar. You're in a chronically stressed state. That's your cortisol is like your get up and go hormone. So we need cortisol because that's what wakes us up in the morning. That's what gets us up and going so we can, get on with our day when the sun comes up. But we're in that chronic state. Eventually what happens, and this is typically, I would say 8 times out of 10, the women who come to me are in this state. It's past my cortisol levels are super high, because eventually your adrenals are going to get tired and they're going to pump less and less and less cortisol out. So then you're going to be kind of on the other side of this downward slope, where now your cortisol is barely pumping out, or your adrenals are barely pumping out cortisol. So you're in this kind of exhaustive state where you may have trouble sleeping. You may have trouble getting up and going because your cortisol is not there, right? You either have trouble losing weight or gaining weight. It could be one or the other. Brain fog, sensitivity to, there's so many things that can happen when you get into that exhaustive state. And that's why I mentioned that before, because I'm like, when you're taking the state of your adrenals there into perimenopause and menopause, like this is not setting yourself up in a very good way. So the other side of that looks like, I know this is not like the really exciting answer, but it's just managing stress. That's like a really boring answer, but it really is managing stress. And it's identifying the source of your stress, where the awareness piece is big. Where are my biggest sources of stress? Is it environmental? Is it like relationships? Is it a work environment? Is it, and the other thing for stress too, it could also be like chemical stress, like toxins, right? We are inundated with toxins each and every day. Yeah. And so the chemical stress is another stress in our body too, but it's like identifying where the sources of stress are. And it's really just mitigating as much as possible. It's impossible for you to never be stressed out ever, because we're humans, but it's identifying the sources of stress. And then it's equipping yourself with the right tools, strategies to help manage the stress, so that when you are in that stressed out state, you can get yourself back to kind of homeostasis and, quicker, so that we're not staying in that stress state. And that's how we take care of our adrenals. It's building that resiliency so that we can get stressed out, but then we can come back down, and our adrenals can kind of like take a breath and they're like, okay, we're back to normal.
Yeah. So I think what's really important there is, I talk about this a lot, we're not seeking a world with no stress, because that's not reality, first of all, but also there are benefits, like not only physical, but emotional and intellectual growth comes from there being like a little bit of sensation of stress, right? So it does have its purpose, but if you're not aware of how it might be just overriding your entire day. So things like, knowing how to complete your stress cycle. What are you doing at bedtime to like actually just turn off the day? And whether it's a mantra of like, all right, I did what I can do today, and tomorrow's another day, and not letting this sort of the hamster just keep running all night in your mind. So I love that you say at the end, so basically what a woman who's, let's say, between 35 and 45 and is feeling those symptoms of, not quite at burnout, but exhaustion, and like they're not just quite functioning like they used to, and probably as a result, like weight gains coming in for multiple reasons, the rise in cortisol and all these other things. Restorative to the adrenals is just time off, I think, and letting them rest. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Yeah.
And talk at the end about boundaries. I think that's a key thing for women to learn. If you haven't learned it already, like learn it. And I know that so many women like post menopause have zero problems with boundaries because they're living
it. For sure.
Highly aware.
Yes. No, yeah. So there are a few other things you can do for your adrenals, just like speaking in specific. So yes, rest and time off is going to be good. It's going to be, I think, mindfulness practices, which you kind of alluded to, I think those are really helpful. And then just thinking of physical things too. So hydration is a big one. And we know that's a big one for overall health, but hydration and remineralizing your body. I know the last episode we talked a lot about minerals. This is a really big piece for your adrenals, because when your adrenals are constantly firing, you're going to work through your stores of sodium and magnesium really fast. Those are going to be the first things that are going to go. Magnesium is responsible for 500 or 600 different reactions in the body. So when you're running through your magnesium, you're literally slowing down like every other function that needs to happen in your body. So replenishing your magnesium and sodium stores if you're trying to repair your adrenals or you're working to like support your adrenals, those are going to be really good minerals to help with that. And in hydration, I say hydration because a lot of times we think hydration is just about drinking water. And I'm pretty sure we probably talked about this in the other episode, but it's not just about drinking water all day, because if you're just drinking plain water all day and you're peeing all day, what is your pee? Like you're peeing out what your body doesn't need, and you're peeing out minerals. So you need to remineralize your body. So that means every day adding minerals or electrolytes or, whatever combination of that to your water, so that you're actually hydrating. I'm using air quotes, hydrating, and it's like you're replenishing your body. So it's not just about the water, and that's going to be supportive for your adrenals too. There's the thing with the minerals, and not to go down a whole rabbit hole, because I know we've talked about this, but the thing with the minerals is your minerals, right? They're the spark plugs in your body. We talked about that, but they're all related to each other. So it's kind of like this cascade effect. So when your sodium and your magnesium are out of order, that's going to affect your potassium, because potassium and sodium are intracellular. Like they're going in and out of your cells. That's going to affect your potassium. Well, and your potassium is going to affect your calcium. So it's just like a chain reaction. So it's like, it's not just, sodium, magnesium are the only two things affected when my adrenals are out of whack. It's really going to cause this chain reaction. And so I emphasize the remineralization. That's a hard one to say. Because you are constantly affecting your mineral levels when you're in this stressed out state. So it's remineralizing your body, building those minerals back up, supporting your adrenals with good minerals, hydration, healthy blood sugar. I know I mentioned that, but just honing in on that piece again. And for me, the healthy blood sugar, and this is, maybe stepping on people's toes who are big fans of intermittent fasting. I personally am not a fan of intermittent fasting for women. There's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of rabbit holes we can go down there too. But I have just found in my experience working with women, I have worked with women who have completely wrecked their hormones and their adrenals from intermittent fasting. And I know fellow FDNs, friends of mine, who have the same, and people have lost their periods and doing. So there's things that can happen. Women's hormones are really not geared to do intermittent fasting, at least not all the time. And so it could be a thing where maybe every so often you do a fast just for kind of like resetting your body, but it's not something you should be doing all month long, all year long. Like it's really not. And so
I agree with you there. And just to touch on that point,
yeah.
I don't think anything's for everyone, and that is definitely in that category. It works better for some women. And to your point, like so many tools you have in your wellness toolbox, it was never designed to be done all the time, all year round.
Exactly.
Cyclical, like our bodies.
Exactly.
Systems are cyclical. So it's really, and then I think the tendency as women, when we think we find something that makes it's like a hack.
Yes.
Take it to extremes instead of honoring it, that it's like this holistic soft tool that you can implement here and there, and it can really support you. But if you're using it as a fix to like not doing a bunch of other things differently, that's another story.
Exactly. Well, and I think too, it's for women, a lot of women, it's just done poorly. And so then, women, and there's a study I saw this guy on Instagram talking about this study, talking about, people talking about how much weight they lose on intermittent fasting. And the guy's like, well, yeah, if you're limiting your food window, and this is what the study showed, if you're limiting your food window to this many hours, you're not going to get in 2,000 calories in 4 or 5 hour window. So of course you're going to lose weight because it's a calorie deficiency. It's not about the intermittent fasting. It's because you're eating less calories. So I think, a lot of times a lot of women are doing it because they're like, think it's going to help them lose weight or whatever. But it's not really what it's for. And we talk about the studies of why intermittent fasting was done to begin with. It was studied on men. It wasn't studied on women. And it was the results and the quote benefits everybody talks about. It's because it was done on men. Like they have different hormonal cycles. They don't have hormones.
There are a few excellent books if you're interested in doing it as a woman. Studies done by women for women on women.
Yes.
But yeah, let's not spiral there too much. I do want for you to touch briefly on, you talk about hydration and minerals. I feel like we haven't really touched on some of the elephants in the room for women and who tend to be in, powerful positions and sort of just managing with their exhaustion. They're relying on caffeinated beverages and alcohol to dial down the cortisol in the evening. Yes. So can you just briefly speak to like long-term what you're doing to your adrenals with that sort of, very sort of acceptable fix to exhaustion?
I'm so glad you brought that up because the caffeine piece is a huge one. I know this like really steps on people's toes who are like addicted to their coffee or, whatever. But the fact is that coffee is a stimulant. Like it's a fact. You can't make that up. So it does stimulate your adrenals. And when I'm working with women who, I've done their labs and I'm like, oh man, their adrenals are like, that's one of the first things to go. And now sometimes it's like a weaning process because it does, there's a process for a lot of women to go, but the fact is that it does. And I am very hesitant for women who, have dealt with either it's like extreme burnout or kind of just in this exhaustive phase to get back on caffeine because it does then becomes that crutch where it's like, well, that's what's like you're saying, that's kind of just what's keeping me going. But the fact is that the caffeine is stimulating your adrenals. It's stimulating cortisol release from your body. It is stimulating your adrenals. So it is affecting your adrenals. And I would say one of the worst things you can do for your adrenals and your blood sugar is drinking coffee first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. Like it's just like a blah to your adrenals, like right out of the gate. So yeah. And then if you're like to what you're saying, you have kind of the cycle of coffee and alcohol or whatever, well, then you're causing this crash. You get to the end of the day and you're really not like, we're not processing anything. You're just numbing it or you're just dissociating. Right. So it's like, we haven't really processed the stress from the day, where the stress came from, how we dealt with the stress. It's like, I'm just going to kind of shut it off and not think about it. Well, then it's just going to compound, right? Just this is another conversation we could talk about too, going down another rabbit hole, but now you're just compounding. Like that's just going to stay under the surface and continue to bubble there. And it's just, you're just kind of perpetuating that cycle because you're not really dealing. And I think it goes to what mentioned earlier about setting boundaries and stuff. I think, that goes a lot with that too. But yeah, this cycle of caffeine to alcohol, I mean, it's like the rise and the crash and the rise and the crash and the rise and the crash. It's like really, really, really detrimental to your adrenals and their function.
Okay. So that's what I knew. Just want to hear from you and your So can we round up this talk up with, like how do you solve that for women that come to you with these problems and just really, I mean, let's face it, they're both habits in themselves, very hard to break, not just for how they're supporting us or, that we think they're supporting us.
Right.
There's identity that goes around with that. There's community oftentimes. So what are some sort of quick tips that you give to women when let's just maybe do one, like coffee or alcohol? Like what are some things they can do differently to start weaning those out or even just reevaluating in what way they're consuming them?
Yeah. I think the hardest part for women who are, quote unquote, have this addiction, whether it's known or not, to the caffeine, I think this is from my experience, they don't think they can function without it. And so there's the fear of like, this is the only way I can get through the day. This is the only way I can get up going in the morning, right? They can't function without it. The fact is you can function without it. So let's just put that out there. The fact is
it's really better after there's some adaptation, but better.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I was going with that. Your body has adapted. So of course your body thinks that's the only way it can function, but your body has everything it needs to function without it. And so it's just getting back to that place where you're using your body's natural energy to get you going and stuff. And so I think the healing part is getting your adrenals used to, getting back to normal levels of cortisol output and all that. So for me, when I'm a big one with the caffeine piece, because this is one of the hardest parts for a lot of women. So as first, the weaning process is I make them switch. If it's a coffee thing for them, first switch is let's just switch to green tea, right? It still has caffeine. It's got more antioxidants and good things in it than coffee. It's less caffeine. It's less stimulating. That it's a different, anyway, the reaction in the body is different than the caffeine and coffee. So let's make that switch first. If we're a multiple cup a day kind of girl, then let's go down to, let's try just one, right? So let's take baby steps. So it's really just giving yourself little baby steps. We try that for a week. Next week, maybe we go to every other day, right? So now we're not, instead of every day, so it's little baby steps along the way. And I think we know that creating habits, that's how we create habits, sustainable habits. It's not just black and white, like, we'll just screw it and we're not doing it ever again. Like that typically doesn't last. It doesn't work. And so if we can give little baby steps to help kind of wean yourself off, that's really the way to make it sustainable. And honestly, I can say this as a matter of fact, and I don't speak in generalities much, but every woman I've worked with, we've had successful weaning off of the coffee and the caffeine. And the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them, they don't even get back on it afterwards. They're like, you're right. You were right. I don't have to have it. So it really can work.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's acknowledging as well, like there's just the strong messaging, there's a whole culture, there's a whole hustle culture. And like I said, the identity piece, is something I talked a lot with clients. It's like, yeah, we like, look how far back you have this habit, all the stories you tell yourself around it, not just like, I think honing in there on the fear that you can't do it. Like, it's just not possible, literally.
Right.
Is a very strong story you're telling yourself.
Yes.
And especially without trying, anybody who's done a full-on detox is going to report that they have more energy at the end and they feel better. You're sleeping better, digestion improves, like all the things, but it doesn't happen overnight. So it is ideal to be doing this, working with somebody who has the vision, can hold for you this space and be like, yeah, it's normal. You have a headache day 2. Let's get to day 5 and see how you feel. And, that there's nothing stronger than your own experience, seeing that it can be different. Start telling yourself different stories, which also takes time to sort of, you can appreciate the art of your matcha instead of, and maybe have, one every other day and not or a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or switching, like a lot of my clients just switch to like an herbal, because for a lot of people too, it's like the ritual too, right? They want something warm in the morning. So like, okay, we make the switch to like an herbal tea or something. So you can still have that ritual. And a lot of my clients are like, all into like different kinds of bougie herbal tea. So it's like a new thing, but it's like, I know it's, it's like the healthier, I don't like to use that word, but it's like the better option for their body, but it's still, they can still have that ritual. And then, like you said, it can just be kind of like a treat every now and then where I don't have to have it. I'm having it because I want it, not because I have to have it.
Yeah. And in my experience, I mean, I go back and forth on how much coffee I drink, but my experience is what, it's building the awareness around all these things about how they're affecting you, whether we talked about stress, we talked about like not eating enough protein. We talked about, building muscle instead of focusing on burning fat all the time. And we talked about caffeine and briefly alcohol, just having a little bit more awareness about how these things are affecting you like on a hormonal level. And not just now in your daily experience, but like having this vision of how do I want to feel? How do I want to experience perimenopause, menopause, and post? And just be your optimal self, like not just now, but throughout your stages.
Yeah. I think it's all, like you said, I think it's just all about intentionality. And I think that goes a long way with the caffeine coffee thing, because I think some women don't even realize how much it's like just like a mindless thing. And that happens so often with a lot of things, with stress, with food, with all the things, like a mindless thing. I didn't realize I literally hadn't eaten the whole day. Like I went all day without eating. Oh, I didn't realize I'm literally only sleeping like 4 hours a night. I didn't realize that, there's this being intentional about it, bringing awareness to all of these little things that do add up to big hormonal changes and affecting your hormones and how your body's functioning and longevity and all the things.
Beautiful. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for coming back. And again, I'll link our previous conversation where we did a much deeper dive on mineralization and, how you might want to reconsider sodium and all the messages we got in the 1980s about zero salt on our food. It's an interesting chat we had about that. So thank you so much, Hope.
Thanks, Megan.
And
same.
We'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Are you looking to surround yourself with like-minded women, be them leaders in the corporate sphere or other entrepreneurs that are interested in having a little bit of community, compassion, accountability, inspiration, motivation, wisdom around their own wellness journey? We're all about agency. We're all about less is more. Super fun monthly events, lots of tidbits of inspiration. Most content is shared via audio, so you can grab it and go as you're folding the laundry or commuting. And it's really just nice to have some place to check into when you're feeling like you need to carve a little bit more space for yourself. You need to up your ante slightly on your self-care and you're just not sure what to focus on. It's a beautiful source of community and I'm really excited to keep building it with you. So do reach out if you are interested in joining. I will also share the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for being here. Hey there, one last thing I wanted to share with you. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you could rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us grow the show, and this being so important to me to get this message out to more women to help them optimize their wellness and ultimately their lives. This is my mission, and I would greatly appreciate it if you could support the podcast by rating and reviewing. Thanks in advance. Have a good one.